My sister locked the door while I was choking on the floor, my throat closing, my lungs burning, and she stood there watching me. Why would someone who grew up with me, who shared my blood, decide that I shouldn't survive the night? My name is Stephanie Cooper. I'm 36 years old, and I'm a head nurse at one of the largest hospitals in Philadelphia. For 15 years, I've held strangers' hands while they took their final breaths. I've delivered news that shattered families. I've stayed calm in emergencies where panic could kill someone. I've been trained to recognize danger, to trust my instincts, to act fast when a life is on the line. But none of that prepared me for what happened when I went home. I didn't want to go back. I told myself I was busy, that the hospital needed me, that the 6-hour drive from Philadelphia to my hometown in Ohio wasn't practical. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. That house had never felt like home. Not once. And now that my grandfather was gone, the man who had been the only reason that place ever felt safe, there was no avoiding it. The drive was long and quiet. Empty highways stretched ahead of me as daylight slowly faded into evening. Mile after mile, memories surfaced, small moments I'd buried years ago, sitting at the edge of family photos, always slightly out of frame, being praised for being independent, which I later learned was another word for unnoticed. I had spent most of my life convincing myself that none of it mattered anymore, that I was strong, that I'd built a life far away from all of it. Still, my hands tightened on the steering wheel as my hometown sign came into view. I pulled into the driveway late in the afternoon. The house looked exactly the same: neatly trimmed lawn, familiar porch light, windows glowing softly from inside. From the outside, it looked warm, normal, safe. No one came out to greet me. Through the front window, I could see my younger sister, Candace, sitting in the living room with her husband, Derek. They didn't look up when my car engine shut off. They didn't move when I stepped onto the porch. It was like I hadn't arrived at all. My mother opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes passed over me. Not cold exactly, but distant, like she was checking off a task rather than greeting her daughter. "Your room is upstairs," she said. No hug, no smile, just directions, as if I were a guest who had already stayed too long. I picked up my bag and stepped inside, feeling that old, familiar tightness in my chest. The one that always came back when I was here. The feeling of taking up space where no one wanted me. Then my grandmother appeared. She was 82, smaller than I remembered, her body fragile after months of caring for my grandfather before his death. But when she saw me, something in her face lit up. She crossed the room with surprising energy and wrapped her thin arms around me, holding on tightly, as if she were afraid I might disappear if she let go. "He asked for you," she whispered into my ear. "Every single day at the end. He only asked for you." I felt it immediately, the shift in the room. The air went cold. Candace's posture stiffened, her expression hardening even though she said nothing. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I had lived my whole life feeling the weight of her resentment without fully understanding it. That night, I went upstairs and unpacked slowly, placing my medical bag beside the bed out of habit. As a nurse with a severe allergy, I never traveled without it. Inside were 2 EpiPens, one in the main pocket, one in the side pocket. I had relied on them my entire life. They were the difference between living and dying. Downstairs, the house was quiet but not peaceful. Sometime after midnight, I went down for a glass of water and heard voices coming from the kitchen. I stopped halfway down the stairs when I recognized Candace's voice and Derek's sharp, strained tone. "We're losing the house in 60 days, Derek said. "The bank isn't negotiating anymore. You need to handle this, Candace. I don't care how." Candace's response was low, barely audible. "I know. I'll fix it. I promise." I stood there longer than I should have, listening. My first instinct wasn't fear, it was sympathy. Poor Candace, I thought. She's under so much pressure. Derek is pushing her, controlling her. Whatever tension had always existed between us, it felt insignificant compared to what she was dealing with now. I went back upstairs telling myself that money stress made people say things they didn't mean. That grief twisted everyone in different ways. That not everything was about me. The next morning, our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, came by to offer condolences. While my mother made coffee, she pulled me aside. Your grandfather was very distressed in his final weeks, she said quietly. He told me someone in the family was pressuring him to sign papers he didn't want to sign. Her eyes softened when she looked at me. But he always spoke of you with such pride. He said you had his heart. Before I could ask more, Candace appeared in the doorway, smiling politely, and guided Mrs. Thompson toward the door. The smile didn't reach her eyes. Later that afternoon, I noticed something small but unsettling. My bedroom felt off. Drawers were slightly open. Clothes weren't folded the way I'd left them. Someone had been in my room. I assumed they were looking for documents related to the inheritance. I didn't think to check my medical bag. I didn't think to count my EpiPens. Why would I? I had no reason to believe anyone in that house would want me dead. What I didn't know was that Grandma hadn't slept that night either. Long after I'd gone to bed, she walked past Candace's room and heard her on the phone. Not with Derek, someone else. Candace's voice, she later told me, was calm, controlled, almost clinical. She's severely allergic to cashews, Candace said. If something happens at dinner tomorrow, she won't make it to the will reading. Problem solved. Grandma froze in the hallway. Early the next morning, she confronted my mother. I heard what Candace is planning, she said, shaking. She's going to hurt Stephanie. You have to stop this. My mother waved her off. You're being paranoid. Candace is stressed about money, but she would never actually hurt anyone. Stop making drama. That was the moment Grandma realized no one was going to protect me. So, she decided she would. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong in that house. My instincts, the same ones that had saved countless patients, were screaming at me. But I silenced them. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was letting old wounds reopen. After all, why would anyone want to hurt me? I was the sister who had nothing, the daughter they barely noticed, the one who had already been forgotten. I didn't know that the trap had already been set. And I had no idea that the only person fighting to save my life was an 82-year-old woman that no one else believed. I didn't sleep much that night. The house was quiet in a way that made every sound feel louder, the tick of the hallway clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Even the wind brushing against the windows felt intrusive, like the house itself was watching me. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying my grandmother's words over and over in my mind. He asked for you, every single day. Those words should have brought comfort. Instead, they felt like a warning I didn't yet understand. In the morning, I woke up early, out of habit. Years of hospital shifts had trained my body to rise before the sun, alert even when my mind wanted rest. I dressed quietly and went downstairs, hoping for a cup of coffee before the house filled with noise and tension. Grandma was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. She looked at me like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. You okay? I asked. She nodded too quickly. Just tired, she said. Didn't sleep much. Neither of us mentioned why. My mother came in a few minutes later, moving around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. She spoke to Grandma about groceries and appointments, then to me about how long I planned to stay, as if the question carried no emotional weight at all. Candace and Derek joined us last, already dressed, already distant. Candace barely looked at me. Derek smiled politely, the kind of smile people use when they're trying not to show stress. It felt like a normal family morning, if you didn't look too closely. But I couldn't stop noticing small things. Candace watched everyone at the table instead of eating. Grandma barely touched her food. My mother avoided eye contact with both of us. And every time Candace's phone buzzed, she checked it immediately, her face tightening just for a second before smoothing again. Later that morning, our neighbor Mrs. Thompson came by. She'd known my grandparents for decades and treated our family history like her own. While my mother stepped away to answer a phone call, Mrs. Thompson leaned toward me, her voice dropping. Your grandfather was very upset near the end, she said. He told me someone was pressuring him to sign papers. He said he felt trapped. I felt my stomach tighten. Did he say who? She shook her head. No. But every time he talked about you, his face softened. He was so proud of you, Stephanie. You should know that. Before I could ask anything else, Candace appeared beside us, as if summoned by instinct. She smiled brightly and ushered Mrs. Thompson toward the door, thanking her for coming, promising to call. The moment the door closed, the warmth drained from her face. I told myself it was grief, stress, that I was reading too much into everything. I had spent my life doing that, minimizing my instincts so other people could stay comfortable. That afternoon, I went upstairs to grab a sweater and noticed something strange. My dresser drawer wasn't fully closed. A few shirts were folded differently than I remembered. My suitcase, which I had left zipped, was slightly open. Someone had been in my room. I stood there for a moment, trying to rationalize it. Maybe my mother had gone looking for something. Maybe Grandma had moved things while cleaning. The house had always treated my space as communal, never fully mine. I brushed off the unease and changed clothes. I didn't check my medical bag. That omission would haunt me later. By early evening, the house had settled into an uneasy calm. Candace announced she was making dinner. She said it casually, as if it were nothing, but the words landed strangely in the room. In all my life, I had rarely seen my sister cook. She had never needed to. The family catered to her needs, not the other way around. "I thought it would be nice," she said, glancing at me. "Something special before the will reading." Her tone was light, almost affectionate. Grandma's hand tightened around her mug. As Candace moved around the kitchen, I noticed the care she put into everything. She lit candles, she arranged the table. She even asked Grandma where the nice plates were kept. The scene felt surreal, like a performance designed for me alone. At one point, she turned to me and smiled. "It's time we act like sisters again," she said. "Don't you think?" There it was. The hook. Despite everything, despite the distance and the years of being treated like I didn't matter, part of me still wanted that. I wanted to believe that grief had softened her, that stress had cracked her armor and revealed something human underneath. I wanted my little sister back, even if I wasn't sure I'd ever truly had her. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "That would be nice." Dinner was almost ready when Grandma quietly pulled me aside in the hallway. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Be careful tonight." I frowned. "About what?" She hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen. "Just trust your instincts." I almost laughed. I had spent my entire adult life teaching patients to trust their bodies, to listen when something felt wrong. And yet, in that house, I had learned to do the opposite. I squeezed her hand gently. "I'll be fine," I said. "I promise." I meant it. We sat down at the table a few minutes later. The chicken looked beautiful, golden, tender, covered in a creamy sauce that smelled rich and warm. Candace watched me as she served my plate, her eyes unreadable. Derek scrolled through his phone. My mother sat silently, her expression carefully neutral. Grandma didn't eat. I noticed that too, but I didn't understand why. I looked at Candace and asked the question I had asked my entire life. The one my family knew carried real weight. "There aren't any cashews in this, right?" I said. "You know about my allergy." Candace laughed softly. "Of course I remember," she said. "I used almonds. I would never put you at risk, Steph. You're my sister." I believed her. The food tasted incredible, comforting, familiar in a way I hadn't felt in that house for years. I had seconds. We talked about small things, neighbors, weather, memories from childhood. For one brief hour, I forgot to be afraid. I forgot to listen to the quiet warning humming under my skin. I didn't see Grandma watching me with tears in her eyes. I didn't see Candace checking the time on her phone. I didn't notice my mother's hands shaking slightly in her lap. All I felt was relief. And relief, I would learn, is the most dangerous feeling of all, because it convinces you the danger has passed right before it arrives. 15 minutes after dinner, my throat began to tighten. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Stress, anxiety, old habits of fear resurfacing. But then my lips tingled. Heat spread across my chest. My skin flushed. My breathing grew shallow, sharp, wrong. I knew this feeling. I had lived with it my entire life. This wasn't panic. This was anaphylaxis. And somewhere in the house, someone already knew exactly what was happening and exactly what they had done. The first thing I felt was denial. Even as my throat tightened, even as my breathing turned sharp and uneven, my mind tried to protect me by offering excuses. Stress, anxiety, too much emotion in one day. I told myself to slow down, to breathe through it, the way I had taught patients to breathe through panic attacks countless times. But this wasn't panic. I knew my body too well for that. The tingling in my lips spread fast, like electricity crawling under my skin. My chest burned. My tongue felt thick, heavy, wrong. I swallowed and felt resistance where there should have been none. Air moved in and out of my lungs in shallow, desperate pulls, each breath louder and more frightening than the last. Anaphylaxis. That word didn't come to me as fear. It came to me as fact. I pushed my chair back hard enough that it scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the quiet dinner conversation. And for a split second, everyone looked at me. Candace's eyes met mine, and something flickered there, something that wasn't surprise. I stood up too fast, dizziness rushing in like a wave. "I need my bag," I tried to say, but my voice came out thin, strained, barely a whisper. I turned toward the stairs, gripping the back of a chair to steady myself. My heart was racing now, pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Every step toward the stairs felt longer than the last. I told myself not to panic, not yet. I had my EpiPens. I always had them. I had survived reactions before. I just needed to get to my room. I made it upstairs on instinct, not memory. My vision blurred at the edges, darkening like a tunnel closing in. I slammed my bedroom door shut behind me and stumbled toward the bed where my medical bag sat. Hands shaking, I dropped to my knees and unzipped the main pocket. Empty. For a moment, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. That pocket was always full. It had been full when I packed. It had been full when I arrived. I shoved my hand inside again, digging deeper, as if the EpiPen might be hiding. Nothing. My breathing grew more frantic. I moved to the side pocket, my fingers clumsy, barely able to grip the zipper. It stuck for a second, and panic surged through me so sharply I almost screamed. I forced it open. Empty. Both EpiPens were gone. A cold understanding spread through me. Heavier than fear. Heavier than the burning in my chest. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't negligence. Someone had searched my bag. Someone had known exactly what to take. The trap hadn't been set at dinner. It had been set the moment I arrived. I staggered back into the hallway, gripping the railing as I descended the stairs. Every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. My throat was swelling fast now, the space for air shrinking with terrifying speed. I needed help. I needed someone to call 911. I reached the living room and collapsed to my knees, my body giving out before my mind could catch up. "Please," I managed to whisper. "Call 911. I can't breathe." Derek looked up from his phone, confusion flickering across his face before it twisted into alarm. He jumped to his feet. "What's happening?" he shouted, rushing toward me. "Candace, call right now." For a second, I thought she would. But Candace didn't move. She stood in the doorway to the kitchen, her arms slowly crossing over her chest. She didn't rush forward. She didn't kneel beside me. She didn't even look concerned. She watched me the way someone watches a problem they believe is about to solve itself. "She's faking," Candace said calmly. Her voice was steady, almost bored. "She always does this for attention. She wants everyone to feel sorry for her before the will reading tomorrow." The words hit harder than the reaction itself. I tried to speak, to tell her she was wrong, to tell her she was killing me, but nothing came out. My vision was tunneling now, black spots dancing at the edges. The room felt too far away, like I was sinking underwater while everyone else stood safely on shore. Derek froze, staring at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "She can't breathe." Candace didn't look at him. Her eyes were still on me. Then I heard it. The click. Soft. Almost polite. The sound of the front door locking. Even through the haze, I understood what that meant. She wasn't just refusing to help. She was making sure no one else could either. In that moment, something shattered inside me. The last excuse I had made for her. The last shred of hope that this was a misunderstanding. That stress had driven her to say something cruel she didn't mean. This was deliberate. This was planned. Derek rushed to the door, tugging at the handle. "It's locked!" he shouted, panic rising in his voice. "Why is it locked?" Candace didn't answer. I collapsed fully onto the floor, my body curling in on itself as it fought for air. My chest heaved uselessly. Every breath was louder, more desperate than the last. I could feel myself slipping, consciousness fraying at the edges. Then Grandma's voice cut through the chaos. "Call for help!" she screamed at Derek. "Call right now!" When Derek fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking too badly to dial, Grandma didn't hesitate. She pulled her own phone from her pocket and hit 911 with a decisiveness that surprised me even through the fog. But she didn't stop there. She raised the phone and turned on the camera. At the time, I didn't understand why. I barely understood where I was. But later, watching the footage, I would see it clearly. She recorded Candace standing motionless while I choked on the floor. She recorded Derek's panicked confusion. She recorded the locked door that delayed the paramedics. And then Grandma did something else. She spoke. She spoke loudly, clearly, making sure every word was captured. "Margaret," she said, her voice shaking with fury and grief. "I told you this morning. I told you what Candace was planning. You said I was imagining things." I turned my head slightly, fighting to stay conscious, and saw my mother standing against the wall. Her face had drained of all color. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. There was nowhere to hide now. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Grandma had warned her. She had known, and she had chosen to do nothing. Grandma didn't wait for anyone else to act. She moved with a strength I didn't know she still had, marching to the back door and unlocking it just as flashing lights appeared in the driveway. The paramedics burst into the house moments later. One of them knelt beside me immediately, his movements quick and precise. I felt the needle pierce my thigh, the epinephrine flooding my system like fire. My throat began to open. Air rushed back into my lungs in harsh, painful gasps. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, my body trembling, my mind drifting, I heard Grandma's voice one last time before the darkness closed in. "I have everything on video," she said. Everything she did, everything she said. The last thing I saw was Candace standing in the doorway. And for the first time in her life, my sister looked afraid. When I woke up, the world felt wrong. The ceiling above me was too white, too bright. The air smelled sharp and clean, nothing like the familiar warmth of home. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. Then the sound reached me, the steady, mechanical beeping beside the bed, and my memory came rushing back all at once. The dinner, the tightening in my throat, the empty medical bag. Candace, standing with her arms crossed while I collapsed. I was in a hospital, and somehow, I was still alive. My chest felt tight, sore, as if I'd run for miles without stopping. My throat burned every time I swallowed. I tried to move my hands and felt resistance, the IV lines taped carefully to my arm. Panic flared for just a moment before a nurse appeared beside me, her voice calm and practiced. "You're okay," she said gently. "You had a severe anaphylactic reaction. You've been unconscious for almost 16 hours. 16 hours. The number echoed in my head, heavy and unreal. 16 hours where my body had been fighting to recover from something that should never have happened. She explained they were keeping me for observation for at least 36 hours. If the paramedics had arrived even 5 minutes later, she said, I wouldn't be here. When she left, the silence pressed in around me. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment, searching for the place where I could have stopped it, where I could have known. But there wasn't one. I had trusted my sister. I had believed her when she looked me in the eye and lied. A soft knock came at the door. Grandma stepped inside. She looked smaller than she had just 2 days earlier, her shoulders hunched, her face drawn tight with exhaustion and grief. Her eyes were red, but there was something else there too, something fierce, almost defiant. She crossed the room and sat beside my bed, taking my hand carefully, as if afraid she might hurt me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "I need you to see something," she said quietly. "I recorded everything that night." My stomach twisted as she pressed play. I watched myself on the screen, crumpled on the living room floor, gasping for air. I watched Candace standing in the doorway, unmoving, her face cold and distant. I heard her voice again, clearer this time, sharper. "She's faking. She just wants attention before the will reading." I watched Derek's panic, his hands shaking as he tried to call for help. I saw the front door handle, locked, trapping us inside. And then I heard Grandma's voice steady, shaking, devastating. "Margaret, I told you this morning. I told you what Candace was planning. You said I was imagining things." The video ended. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I couldn't. My chest ached with a grief that felt deeper than fear. My sister hadn't just tried to hurt me. She had planned to erase me. And my mother had known something was wrong and chosen silence. "Why?" I whispered. "Why does she hate me so much?" Grandma squeezed my hand. "It was never about you doing anything wrong," she said softly. "It was about what you represented." She told me then what I had never fully understood, how Grandpa had always seen something of himself in me, how he admired my independence, my kindness, my refusal to play games. Every time he praised me, every time he asked about my life, something inside Candace twisted tighter. "She spent her whole life trying to earn what you had naturally," Grandma said. "And instead of learning to love herself, she decided to destroy you." Later that afternoon, a man knocked on my door. A paramedic, young, with steady eyes and a quiet seriousness about him. His name was Jordan. He introduced himself gently, then hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "There's something you should know," he said. "That night, I recorded part of the scene when we arrived." My heart skipped. "Recorded?" He nodded. "Body cam, standard procedure. But what stood out was the locked door and the fact that no one tried to help you until we forced entry. I documented everything." Something shifted inside me then. For the first time since waking up, I felt something other than shock and grief. I felt clarity. The will reading, I learned, had been postponed until I was discharged. Candace had been furious, according to Grandma, insisting it continue without me. I lay in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling again, but this time, my thoughts were sharper. This wasn't just about what happened at dinner. This was bigger. The next visitor caught me off guard. Derek stood in the doorway, pale, unshaven, his eyes hollow like he hadn't slept since that night. He sat down slowly, hands clasped together, and stared at the floor. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I swear to you, Stephanie, I didn't know." I studied him, searching for deception, but all I saw was a man confronting the reality of who he had married. "There's something else," he added. "For the past few months, Candace has been meeting with a notary. She said it was estate planning for your grandfather." I believed her. I didn't ask questions. A cold feeling spread through my chest. "What kind of meetings?" I asked. "Private ones," he said. "She never wanted anyone else there." After he left, my phone rang. It was my grandfather's attorney. His voice was careful, serious. "Your grandfather contacted me 2 weeks before his death," he said. "He was distressed. He believed someone was pressuring him to sign documents against his wishes." He paused. "So he asked for a private meeting at the hospital during a routine checkup. There, with witnesses, he signed an addendum to his will." My breath caught. "The addendum declares any document signed under coercion invalid," he continued. "And it names you, Stephanie, as his sole heir." After the call, Grandma pulled a sealed envelope from her purse. "He gave this to me," she said. "He told me to give it to you only if something bad happened." Inside was a handwritten letter from Grandpa, his familiar handwriting shaky but determined. Beneath it were 2 photocopies of signatures, one steady, unmistakably his, the other uneven, forced. A forgery. Candace hadn't just tried to kill me. She had tried to steal my grandfather's final wishes and replace them with her own lies. I sat there, holding the evidence in my hands, feeling something inside me finally harden not into hatred, but into resolve. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible anymore, and I wasn't going to let the truth stay buried. After the call with my grandfather's attorney ended, the hospital room felt smaller, not because of the walls, but because the truth had finally taken shape. It was no longer a series of terrible moments stitched together by shock and grief. It was a pattern, a design, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Candace hadn't acted on impulse. She hadn't snapped in a moment of desperation. She had planned this carefully, patiently, over weeks, maybe months. She had searched my room. She had taken both of my EpiPens. She had cooked a meal knowing exactly what would happen to my body. She had locked the door. And when I was dying in front of her, she hadn't hesitated. That realization hurt more than the reaction itself. I lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling again. But this time I wasn't lost in confusion. I was thinking clearly, clinically, the same way I did during emergencies at work, when emotions had to be pushed aside so decisions could be made. Grandma sat beside me, silent but watchful. She had always been like that quiet strength, underestimated by everyone who mistook softness for weakness. "She really tried to kill you," she said finally, her voice breaking despite her effort to stay steady. "Yes," I said. The word came out flat, heavier than it sounded. And she thought she'd get away with it. Grandma reached into her purse again and placed the envelope on my lap. Grandpa's letter. I had read it once already, but now I read it again, slower. Every word felt deliberate, chosen with care by a man who knew time was running out. He wrote about love, about truth, about seeing people for who they were, not who they pretended to be. And between the lines, I could feel his regret, not for choosing me, but for not acting sooner. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "I'm not going to expose her yet," I said. Grandma looked at me sharply. "What?" "Not yet," I repeated. "If Candace knows the truth now, she'll panic, she'll lie, she'll destroy evidence. I need her to believe she's won." Grandma studied my face, searching for fear, hesitation, something fragile she could protect. Instead, she found resolve. "You sound like your grandfather," she said quietly. That afternoon, a police detective assigned to my case came by to ask questions. I told her everything. About my allergy, the missing EpiPens, the locked door, Candace's words. Grandma's warning to my mother that morning. I showed her the video. She listened without interrupting, her expression tightening as the picture came together. "This was premeditated," she said when I finished. "We'll be pursuing charges." "I need you to wait," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Wait?" "Until after the will reading," I explained. "She's expecting it to go a certain way. Let it." The detective considered this for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," she said. "But once that reading happens, we move." That night, after visiting hours ended, I was alone again. The quiet felt different now. Less threatening, less hollow. I picked up my phone and scrolled through messages I hadn't answered yet, concerned colleagues, distant relatives, people who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly expressing shock and sympathy. One name stopped me. Derek. I stared at it for a long time before answering. "Why are you calling?" I asked when he spoke. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice sounded exhausted. "I think Candace forged your grandfather's signature." I closed my eyes. Part of me had already known. "How long have you suspected?" I asked. There was a pause. "Since the notary meetings," he admitted. "Things didn't add up. But I didn't want to know." That honesty, late as it was, landed harder than denial would have. "Then you have a choice," I said. "Stay silent and be complicit. Or tell the truth when it matters." "When is that?" he asked. "The will reading," I said. "Decide what kind of man you want to be." I ended the call before he could respond. The next morning, the doctor cleared me for discharge with strict instructions to rest. I nodded and thanked him, already knowing I wouldn't follow all of them. There was too much to do. As Grandma helped me pack, she hesitated. "Are you afraid?" she asked. I thought about it. About the girl I used to be the one who flinched at raised voices, who apologized for taking up space, who learned early that silence was safer than honesty. No, I said finally. I'm done being afraid. When we returned to the house, it felt different. Not warmer, not kinder, just exposed. Like the walls had absorbed too many lies and were finally starting to crack. Candace wasn't there. According to Mom, she had gone out to clear her head. Derek hadn't come home either. Mom hovered awkwardly, trying to speak, then stopping herself. She looked like someone who sensed the ground shifting under her feet but didn't know why. That night, Grandma and I talked quietly in the living room. She told me more about the addendum, how Grandpa had asked her to drive him to the hospital, how he'd insisted on witnesses, how he'd made her promise to protect me if something went wrong. He knew, she said. Not everything, but enough. I nodded. So did you. She smiled sadly. I just didn't know how far your sister would go. Neither had I. The day of the will reading arrived faster than I expected. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, studying my reflection. I looked tired, thinner, but there was something else there too, something solid, something unmovable. Candace would walk into that room believing she had already erased me. She would sit there confident, composed, certain that her version of the story was the only one that mattered. She didn't know about the video. She didn't know about the medic's report. She didn't know about the forged signature. And she didn't know that the sister she had tried to kill was done disappearing. As I picked up my keys, Grandma touched my arm. No matter what happens, she said, your grandfather saw you. That was enough. I walked out the door, ready not for revenge, but for truth. I walked through the front door of my family's house, knowing it would be the last time. The doctors had wanted me to rest another day. They'd warned me about delayed reactions, about how trauma had a way of resurfacing when the adrenaline wore off. I thanked them, promised I'd be careful, and left anyway. There was no amount of rest that could prepare me for what was waiting inside that living room. The house had been rearranged for the will reading. Chairs were set up in a semicircle, all facing a small table where my grandfather's attorney, Mr. Harrison, sat with his briefcase neatly placed at his feet. The room smelled faintly of furniture polish and old paper, the scent of things meant to look orderly while hiding decay beneath the surface. My mother was already seated, hands folded tightly in her lap, her face carefully neutral. Grandma sat in the corner, her posture calm, her phone resting in her hand like a silent promise. Derek stood near the window, staring out at the yard as if he were already halfway gone. And Candace sat in the center of the room like she belonged there. She looked composed, confident, dressed as if this were a celebration instead of a reckoning. When she saw me step inside, her face went white for just a fraction of a second. Fear flashed in her eyes before she smoothed it away, replacing it with a tight, practiced smile. She hadn't expected me to show up. Stephanie, my mother said, rising slightly from her chair. Are you sure you should be here? You should still be resting after your episode. She said the word like I'd fainted from excitement instead of nearly dying on the living room floor. I wouldn't miss this, I replied calmly, taking an empty seat. This is Grandpa's legacy. I want to hear every word. Candace watched me closely as I sat down. Her confidence returned quickly. She had no reason to doubt herself. In her mind, everything had already gone according to plan. The will in Mr. Harrison's briefcase would give her the house, the money, the control she had chased her entire life. She believed she had erased me. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. He removed a document and began reading in a steady, measured voice. This is the last will and testament of Robert James Cooper, dated 4 months prior to his death. He moved through the formal language assets, accounts, legal phrasing that washed over the room like background noise. I watched Candace as he spoke. Her posture relaxed more with every passing sentence. My mother nodded occasionally, as if affirming an outcome she'd been expecting all along. Then, Mr. Harrison reached the part everyone was waiting for. According to the will, Candace was to receive 80% of my grandfather's estate. The house, the savings accounts, the investments, everything of real value. I was to receive a small cash gift, $5,000 and nothing more. A symbolic gesture. A reminder of where I stood. Candace's smile spread slowly, triumphantly. She didn't even try to hide it. She glanced at me, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction, as if daring me to react. My mother exhaled softly, relief settling over her face like this outcome restored balance to the world. I said nothing. I didn't look away. I waited. Mr. Harrison set the document down and folded his hands. However, he said. The word landed like a crack of thunder. Candace stiffened. However? She repeated sharply. Mr. Harrison continued, unbothered. I must inform you that there exists an addendum to this will. Candace stood abruptly. There is no addendum. I would have known. Mr. Harrison didn't look at her. The addendum was signed at Regional Medical Center 3 days before Mr. Cooper's death, in the presence of his attending physician and a registered nurse. The color drained from Candace's face. The addendum declared the previous will invalid due to coercion and undue influence. It stated that any documents signed under pressure were void, and it named one person as the sole heir to my grandfather's entire estate. Me. The room exploded. That's a lie! Candace shouted. He wasn't competent. He didn't know what he was signing. Mr. Harrison calmly reached into his briefcase and removed another document. This is a certification from Dr. Michael Torres, Mr. Cooper's attending physician. It confirms that at the time of signing, Mr. Cooper was in full possession of his mental faculties. The document was witnessed and notarized. Candace opened her mouth again, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, she had no script. I stood up slowly. Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. May I present additional evidence? He nodded. Of course. I walked to the television in the corner of the room and connected Grandma's phone. The screen flickered, then came to life. The video played. The room filled with the sound of my own gasping breaths. My body, crumpled on the floor. Candace standing in the doorway, arms crossed, unmoving. Her voice came through clearly, chilling in its calm. She's faking. She wants attention before the will reading. The video showed Derek's panic, his confusion, his frantic attempt to call for help. It showed the front door locked. It showed Grandma unlocking it, screaming for paramedics. Then her voice cut through the room again, loud and unmistakable. Margaret, I told you this morning. I told you what Candace was planning. You said I was imagining things. Every head turned toward my mother. Her face had gone gray. She looked like a woman watching her entire world collapse, trapped in a truth she could no longer deny. There it was recorded, permanent, undeniable proof that she had been warned and chosen to do nothing. The video ended. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Derek moved. He stepped away from the window and faced the room. 3 months ago, he said quietly. Candace started meeting privately with a notary. She told me it was estate planning. I believed her. I shouldn't have. He turned to Candace, his voice hollow. I saw things that didn't make sense, and I chose not to look closer. He looked at me. I'm done. Without another word, Derek walked out the front door. He didn't slam it. He didn't look back. He simply left. Candace stood alone in the center of the room. Her husband gone, her lies exposed, her plan in ruins. I spoke for the first time since the video ended. I didn't come here for revenge, I said quietly. I just wanted the truth to be seen. Grandma's voice came softly from the corner. Your grandfather always knew who you both were. That's why he made the choices he did. Candace finally looked at me then, not with rage, not with guilt, but with a dawning realization that everything she had built her life around had collapsed. She had tried to erase me, and she had lost everything instead. The house emptied faster than I expected. After Derek walked out, no one spoke for a long time. The silence felt heavier than shouting ever could. Candace stood frozen in the center of the living room, no longer the confident woman who had walked in believing she would leave with everything. She looked smaller now, stripped of the role she had played her entire life. Not because she felt remorse, there was none in her eyes, but because the illusion she lived inside had finally shattered. My mother remained seated, her hands trembling in her lap. She didn't look at Candace. She didn't look at me. She stared at the floor as if it might open up and swallow her whole. For the first time, she had nothing to say. No excuses. No soft explanations. No way to pretend this was all a misunderstanding. Mr. Harrison quietly gathered his documents and stood. "I'll be in touch regarding the next legal steps," he said, his tone professional, final. He nodded at me, then at Grandma, and left without another word. One by one, people drifted away. Aunts, uncles, neighbors who had come expecting a quiet reading and left with a story they would never stop talking about. By the time the front door closed for the last time, only 4 of us remained in the house. Candace, my mother, Grandma, and me. Candace was the first to move. She turned toward my mother, her voice sharp, almost frantic. "Say something," she demanded. "You're just going to sit there." My mother flinched, but still didn't speak. Candace laughed bitterly. "Of course. You never do when it matters." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear fully take root behind her eyes. Not fear of losing money, not fear of prison, fear of being seen for who she truly was. "This isn't over," she said quietly. I met her gaze without flinching. "It was over the moment you locked the door," I replied. She opened her mouth to respond, but footsteps sounded outside before she could. 2 police officers appeared at the doorway, their presence calm but unmistakably serious. One of them spoke gently, almost kindly. "Candace Cooper?" he asked. "We need you to come with us." Her face drained of color. "For what?" she snapped, though her voice shook. "Attempted murder by poisoning," the officer said, "and reckless endangerment." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Candace turned to my mother again, desperation breaking through her composure. "Mom," she whispered, "you're not going to let this happen." My mother finally looked up, and she said nothing. That silence was louder than any accusation. Candace let out a sharp, humorless laugh as the officers guided her toward the door. "You always loved her more," she said over her shoulder. "Not at me, but at my mother. You just didn't want to admit it." The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. 2 days later, the news had spread through town like wildfire. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered my name. Old classmates sent messages filled with disbelief and poorly hidden curiosity. Neighbors whispered. The local paper ran a short article, nothing sensational, just facts, but it was enough. The golden child had fallen, and everyone wanted to know how. The charges were severe. The missing EpiPens proved premeditation. The recorded video proved intent. The locked door erased any possibility of denial. The prosecutor told me Candace could face up to 15 years in state prison if convicted. Her attorney was already pushing for a plea deal, trying to reduce it to 3 to 5 years with parole. And that was only the beginning. The forgery investigation was separate and ongoing. Handwriting experts had confirmed what we already knew. The signature on Grandpa's earlier will wasn't his. It was clumsy, forced, wrong. Candace's secret notary meeting suddenly made sense. Derek filed for legal separation the day after the will reading. He cooperated fully with investigators, handing over documents, emails, anything that might help. I didn't feel sorry for him. He had admitted he suspected something was wrong and chose not to ask questions. Silence, I had learned, carried consequences too. Candace's real estate license was revoked. Her professional reputation collapsed overnight. For the first time in her life, she couldn't smile or charm her way out of accountability. 1 week later, I stood in my childhood bedroom folding clothes into a suitcase. The room felt different now, not warmer, not kinder, but honest. The tension that had lived in the walls for decades had finally been ripped out, leaving behind a heavy, quiet emptiness. I was folding my last shirt when I heard footsteps in the hallway. My mother stood in the doorway. She looked older, smaller, like someone who had spent the last week watching everything she believed about herself fall apart. "Stephanie," she said softly, "we need to talk." I didn't stop packing. "You can talk," I said. "I'm listening." She hesitated, then stepped inside. Candace was always fragile, she began. She needed more attention, more reassurance. I thought if I protected her enough, she'd turn out okay. I turned to face her then, not angry, not shaking, just clear. You didn't protect her, I said. You enabled her. She swallowed hard. When your grandmother warned me that morning, I didn't believe it. I couldn't. I thought she was exaggerating. I thought Candace was just stressed. You knew, I said calmly. You were warned, and you chose not to act. Her eyes filled with tears. I never thought she would actually. You don't get to finish that sentence, I interrupted gently. There's a difference between not knowing and not wanting to know. You chose comfort over my life. The words landed, final and immovable. She opened her mouth to argue, to explain, to soften the truth, but nothing came. There was no version of the story where she hadn't failed me. I returned to my suitcase and zipped it shut. This isn't reconciliation, I said quietly. This is the end of pretending. She nodded slowly, as if she understood, as if she finally saw what her choices had cost. She left without saying goodbye. So did I. When I carried my suitcase downstairs, Grandma was waiting by the front door. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright, with something I recognized now: relief. You did nothing wrong, she said, as if reading my thoughts. I hugged her tightly, holding on longer than I ever had before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of letting go of the people who had hurt me. I was afraid only of staying. And I wasn't going to do that anymore. The house was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not the sharp silence of being ignored. Not the tense quiet that pressed against your chest and made you feel small. This was different, heavy, honest, emptied of pretending. I stood in the hallway for a moment, after my mother walked away, listening to the sound of my own breathing, steady now, unafraid. I carried my suitcase downstairs. The wheels bumped softly against each step, a small sound that felt final. Grandma was waiting by the front door, her coat already on, her hands folded as if she'd been standing there for a while. She looked fragile, but when she met my eyes, there was strength there, quiet and unshakable. I set my suitcase down and hugged her. Really hugged her, the way I never had before. She held me tightly, like she'd been holding on for years, just waiting for the right moment to let go. He knew you would survive this, she said softly. He just wanted to make sure you knew why you deserved to. Outside, the afternoon light was pale and cool. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk and took one last look at the house. For most of my life, I'd believed family meant endurance, that love was something you earned by staying quiet, by being useful, by disappearing when it was convenient for others. But standing there, I finally understood how wrong I'd been. I drove away without looking back. Back in Philadelphia, the hospital felt strangely comforting. The steady rhythm of monitors, the familiar smell of antiseptic, the quiet competence of the staff, it grounded me. My colleagues welcomed me gently, careful not to ask too much. They had heard pieces of the story, enough to know that something fundamental had shifted. I returned to work slowly, choosing shorter shifts at first. I found that my patients noticed the change in me before I did. I listened differently. I stayed a little longer at bedsides. I spoke more honestly. Trauma had stripped something away, but it had also clarified what mattered. A few weeks later, the legal process continued without me having to chase it. Candace accepted a plea deal. The attempted murder charge remained, along with reckless endangerment. The forgery case followed, heavy with evidence. She would spend years answering for choices she had made with a clear mind and a cold heart. People asked me if I felt relief. The truth was more complicated. I felt grief for the sister I never truly had. I felt anger for the years I spent questioning my worth. But beneath all of that, I felt something steadier: peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of truth. The inheritance came through quietly. No celebration. No public announcement. Just paperwork and signatures and keys. I didn't rush to sell anything. I didn't need to. What mattered wasn't the money or the house or the accounts. What mattered was the message my grandfather had left behind. You were seen. One afternoon, Grandma came to visit me in Philadelphia. She brought a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside were old photographs and letters, pieces of my grandfather's life he wanted me to have. We spent hours on the couch, laughing softly, crying when we needed to, letting the past rest where it belonged. Your grandmother and I planned more than you think, she admitted with a gentle smile. We knew something was wrong. We just didn't know how far it would go. I reached for her hand. You saved my life. She squeezed back. You saved your own. I just refused to let anyone pretend otherwise. As months passed, I began to build a life that felt entirely mine. I redecorated my apartment, choosing colors I loved instead of ones that felt safe. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from, while trying to survive a family that never made room for me. I learned, slowly, that peace didn't require permission. Sometimes, late at night, memories still surfaced: the sound of the lock clicking, the calm in Candace's voice as she said I was faking, the way my mother had looked away. Those moments still hurt. Healing, I learned, wasn't erasing the past. It was refusing to let it define the future. I kept my EpiPens everywhere now, not out of fear, but out of respect for my own life. On the anniversary of my grandfather's death, I visited his grave alone. I brought flowers and the letter he had written me, folded and worn from rereading. I sat on the grass and spoke out loud, telling him about my work, about Grandma, about the quiet joy of finally living without shrinking. I see myself now, I told him, the way you always did. When I stood to leave, the wind moved gently through the trees, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I felt like I was walking toward myself. Family, I learned, isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by protection, by honesty, by who shows up when your life is on the line. Anyone who asks you to disappear so they can shine is not family. Anyone who dismisses your pain to preserve their comfort has already made their choice. I made mine too. I chose truth over silence. I chose boundaries over guilt. I chose a future where I am seen. And for the first time in my life, that choice feels like home. Before we close this story, I want you to pause for a moment and think about what you just witnessed. This was never only a story about inheritance, betrayal, or even an attempted murder. At its core, this video is about something far more familiar and far more painful: the experience of being invisible inside your own family. It's about what happens when warning signs are ignored, when silence is chosen over truth, and when love becomes conditional instead of protective. Stephanie's story shows us how danger doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who know our weaknesses best, the people we trust to keep us safe. It also reminds us that accountability often arrives quietly, through evidence, patience, and the courage to stop excusing harm. Justice here wasn't loud or impulsive; it was deliberate, documented, and undeniable. Most importantly, this story carries a message for anyone who has ever been dismissed, minimized, or told they were overreacting. Your instincts matter, your boundaries matter, and you are allowed to walk away from anyone who makes you feel small, even if they share your blood. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to Hanji Wie Iyagi and turning on notifications. Each story we share is meant to give voice to the unheard and light to the places people try to keep hidden. And if you feel comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.